Good afternoon, KubeCon, and welcome to Operator Day North America 2022. My name is David Booth, and I'm the VP of Cloud Native Applications at Canonical. This is the fourth time that I've hosted Operator Day, and the common theme we've seen is a rising interest in operating, automating, and simplifying Kubernetes usage. Now, we regularly collect and share data in our Kubernetes and cloud native operations surveys and reports. And in each of those, over 30% of respondents suggest that they're interested in getting started with operators as a solution to those challenges of operating, automating, and simplifying Kubernetes. There are many other data points and patterns and usage. And right now, we're collecting data for our next report. So please click on the link at the side and share your experiences with us. Everyone who completes the survey also gets notified when the results are out. If you don't see exactly what you're aiming to learn today, we have a library of videos from previous operator days where we covered a wide range of topics. These are already available on our YouTube channel, which should also pop up on your screens right now, including observability, AI/ML, DevSecOps, data ops, networking, Kubernetes on the edge, across the enterprise and at your own workstation. Today, we'll explore Kubernetes and automation at both high and detailed levels. There's something for everyone in our schedule. First, we'll kick off the day with Mark Shuttleworth, the CEO of Canonical. Then Alex Jones will take us through a quick recap and tell us what's been happening in the world of Kubernetes. Following Alex, we'll dive into security, updates to Juju, charmed operators, charmed applications, and the suite of dev tools available. Working in HPC environments with Juju on Metal, the evolution of OpenStack with and without Kubernetes. We'll explore the use cases and success stories of organizations adopting the charmed operator framework, including SpectroCloud, Linbit, and OmniVector Solutions, who'll talk about their work with Slurm. Finally, we'll share more examples of charmed applications, simplifying the setup and day two operations, and making life easier for all their operators. We've got a big day ahead, so let's get started. I'd like to introduce Mark Shuttleworth.
David, hello.
Welcome to Operator Day, Mark.
Thank you for having me. Great to be with you.
As always, we start with a quick review and then a jump into our newest Kubernetes-centric features. First, why is Canonical at KubeCon, and what do we offer to support cloud-native infrastructure and applications?
Well, I think Canonical's at KubeCon because Ubuntu is widely recognized as being the #1 platform for all things container and Kubernetes. I think the CNCF study regularly shows Ubuntu north of 60% share across all different kinds of use cases in all different kinds of environments. And that's really because of our focus on representing the very, very best of what Linux and open source can do. And containers do kind of push the outer boundaries of technical possibility using the latest features in the kernel and so on and so forth for better security, better performance, all of those good things. So I think that's why people tend to choose Ubuntu on bare metal, data center, and public cloud. A lot of our efforts are in partnership with the people who run specific kinds of infrastructure like the public clouds and VMware. So making sure that their offerings and our offerings are well aligned so that people really get the very, very best of what the underlying substrate can do and what Linux can do and what Kubernetes can do. So that's part of the secret of that sort of 60% number. And of course, we do have two Kubernetes distributions that are designed for either sort of very complex situations, in the case of charmed Kubernetes, where you're trying to get the full richness of what Kubernetes can do, and you really want a lot of control of the architecture, or the other end of the spectrum, where you just want a no-brainer Kubernetes that could be the same Kubernetes anywhere, and that's MicroGates, obviously.
Let's dig into a little bit about both of those distributions and the updates that came alongside Kubernetes 125. Could you start with MicroGates?
Sure, and I think my colleague Alex is going to be presenting in more detail a little bit later, but I'm happy to hit the high notes and the headlines and teaser trailer. So I think for MicroGates, the big story is the general availability of strict confinement. So that is, I think, the best story in the market for security around Kubernetes. And what we're doing there is we're wrapping Kubernetes, which already has its own kind of container confinement story. We're wrapping all of those containers in another container to give us a sort of an outer boundary for anything that any of those containers can do on the system. And so we call that strict confinement. It comes from the underlying use of snaps. Snaps are an application container. So you can say, well, we're running your Kubernetes inside a snap, and we're running that in a strictly confined snap. So we're using the full set of mechanisms that snaps can invoke in the kernel to kind of isolate anything that Kubernetes does, including its underlying containers, from everything else that's going on in the system. And so that's a really big step. It's specifically important for us, in connecting the dots between Kubernetes and our IoT story. But of course, that same thing can be used on cloud or on physical servers. It's a general mechanism. So I think that's the really big leap forward in MicroGates. And then there's been good work on shrinking the footprint of MicroGates so that it uses less space. Again, useful for smaller devices, or critical for smaller devices, but still useful for anybody who's running Kubernetes. Sideloading images. So MicroGates, the idea is that MicroGates is kind of a batteries included Kubernetes. You just deploy one thing, and then you get the fixed standard set of capabilities. But there's now a mechanism for you to sideload, in other words, to replace the Docker images that we're using for standard capabilities on MicroGates, to replace those with your own, and to be able to do those in an air-gapped kind of environment. So that's what the sideloading kind of capability is all about. And lastly, as we push out into some areas like specialist computing, like high-performance computing, we've added Power 9 support. And Power 9 is used in quite a lot of very high-end HPC, AI/ML type environments. So it's exciting to see that come together.
Fantastic. I know we're just hitting the bullet points here and like the high-level information, but how about CharmKates?
So Charm Kubernetes, so that is the more sophisticated offering where essentially you can deploy multiple components of Kubernetes, scale them independently, place them independently. So you would use that implementation where, for example, you're building either like a financial Kubernetes or a telco Kubernetes, and you want to do very careful control of the componentry, exactly what's bound to what network, exactly what is using which hosts, and so on. So there's a lot of work from a telco point of view on networking interfaces, CNIs, and improving your ability to kind of bind to telco-oriented networks. The big new thing is support for Oven and OVS as a first-class thing. So there's essentially a binding for Oven, OVS, and Charmed Kubernetes. And that gives you kind of richer control of low-level networking for both the Kubernetes itself and the workloads running on top of Kubernetes. Bunch of work on secrets management, and so using making high availability secret storage capable in Charmed Kubernetes, and then integrating with a bunch of the cloud-specific capabilities for vSphere, Azure, and OpenStack. And so making sure that we can kind of bring together the best of Charmed Kubernetes and those specific cloud capabilities. A lot of work in observability, so essentially integrating components of Charmed Kubernetes with the observability stack, which we use widely. The Charmed observability stack is now Prometheus, Grafana, and a bunch of components wrapped around that. So that's all nicely integrated with CharmKates. And then we've moved to full operators for a lot of the components that people tend to run as standard services on top of Kubernetes. And that's useful because it gives you more kind of lifecycle management, long-term lifecycle management of those components.
There's a lot of stuff going on in there. You mentioned earlier that Ubuntu is used in about 60% of the situations where people are using Kubernetes. And we've just made an announcement about Ubuntu Pro. In that press release, you mentioned that since Canonical first launched Ubuntu LTSs with 5 years of free security coverage for the main operating system, our enterprise customers have asked us to cover more and more of the wider open source landscape under private commercial agreements. It sounds like now we're ready to offer the benefits of all of that work free of charge to anyone in the world with a free personal Ubuntu Pro subscription. Can you tell us a little more about this? What is Canonical about to start covering?
So the open source landscape is vast, and most traditional enterprise Linux security subscriptions cover a fairly bounded set of what you would think of as the critical stuff that runs on the operating system and runs on everybody's machine, right? So Ubuntu was unusual in that we, with our first LTS release, we made that available for free for 5 years, and that really changed the game. It's partly, I think, why Ubuntu gets so widely adopted, right? You know, anybody for free can download the operating system, install it, and get enterprise-grade security updates for the operating system for 5 years. Pretty quickly, we found enterprises saying, well, that's great, and I'm using it, but I'd like more. I'd like either longer security updates, or I'd like security updates of additional stuff. So the longer security update piece we were able to address with our extended security maintenance offering, and so that's now part of the new Pro. What we've also done is we've aggregated security. We've kind of grown and grown and grown our ability to cover more and more and more of the Debian package space. And so we've now got to the point where we support the entire Debian package space, right? So what Pro is it takes the free offering, which is kind of the operating system itself, for 5 years, and it turns that into everything for 10 years, right? So anything in Ubuntu for 10 years, effectively. So that's what we've announced. And the free personal subscription, yes, we've said anybody can give us their email address and get a subscription that covers 5 machines, which they can use for both personal and professional use, commercial use, on up to 5 machines, as long as it's their own machines or machines belonging to a business that they themselves own, effectively, right? So, you know, any sort of startup or small-scale personal and commercial use case is covered by the free personal subscription.
I've heard that's pretty broad. I've heard a number like 25,000 packages floating around.
Well, yeah, Debian's big. Ubuntu's a little bit bigger, and all of that's covered in the Pro subscription. So now, in any critical or high CVE in that entire package set will be fixed within a defined SLA. Don't ask me to tell you what the SLA is. I think it's 24 hours for criticals, and I forget what it is for highs. But essentially, this is now by far the broadest coverage with the best SLA for open source security anywhere in the business. And that is interesting for people who are building containers, right? So if you're building your own Docker images, you're building them on Ubuntu, you're almost certainly pulling in packages from that broader set. And you could analyze your containers and see, okay, do any of those have security issues that a Pro subscription would cover effectively.
Do you want to go a little bit more detailed into that, into talking about containers and Kubernetes and the security we provide there?
Sure. So most of our work to date has been with the world's biggest ISVs, because a lot of tech companies have embraced Ubuntu for their own products, and a lot of them are moving to containers for distributing their products. So if you think about an Ericsson or a VMware or a Microsoft or a Google, a lot of the products that they ship to their customers are containers using Ubuntu with a bunch of, you know, commodity software effectively that comes from us, and then their own secret sauce on top of that, right? And that's the product. And they use Pro to make sure that all of those commodity packages are secured and meet with standard enterprise requirements, as well as things like FIPS or HIPAA, regulatory requirements effectively. So they will do that work for their secret source components. We can't help with that. That's their work. But all of the underlying stuff that they consume from Ubuntu effectively is covered by Pro, which they embed and pass on to their customers when they're using their products effectively. So that's been our kind of primary focus. Now we're in a position to kind of offer that to the enterprise market as well, for people who have their own pipelines to build their own containers, which they may use internally or they may put on public cloud as well.
Fantastic. Previously, we spoke a little bit about Canonical and the direction towards an IPO. You've spoken with TechCrunch about it. Would you like to share anything about that with the audience here at KubeCon?
Well, nothing new, but I will say again, I'm happy to say again, our intention is to list the company, I think, next year. We are, there are a whole bunch of things that we need to do in order to meet public company listing requirements. Some of those are purely financial, but some of them sort of read on the product and some of our kind of operations and operating processes. Financially, we're now over the thresholds that we had set to take that step. So that clears that set of hurdles. We're not in a rush, but we're also now confident that we can do it and ready to do it. So we're just making sure that we do it properly, and then we'll be a public company.
So it's safe to say that there's going to be a lot of hiring in the coming year?
Yes, although not so much of that is focused on being a public company. Obviously, there are some new roles that have been created that perform specific functions that are needed as we take that step. But Canonical's growing like crazy, yeah. So we have something like 300 open positions at the moment, on top of 900 people in the company today. So if folks are interested and think we do great work, then please do take a look at our careers website, and we'd love to take your application.
That's really interesting. As we're going into the market that we're going into, and anybody who's watching Bloomberg or something else like that, will see that they're constantly looking at hiring and at employment numbers. And it looks like Canonical is one of the companies that's continuing forward with hiring and continuing to grow.
Yeah, I think a lot of tech companies right now are using the current economic uncertainty as an opportunity to step back and kind of reflect on how they're prioritizing and allocating resources and so on. So a lot of other tech companies have talked about hiring freezes and in some cases layoffs. In our case, we did that just a couple of years ago. We had a good hard look at what we wanted to be focused on and what kind of talent base we wanted to have. So we have been working, we have a rolling 2-year plan for the shape of the organization. And that served us very, very well. At this stage, I see no reason why we would be slowing down on our growth plans or our public listing plans. Yes, I think no one will be immune to a broad global recession. That's certainly going to impact on everybody, including Canonical, but not in a way that fundamentally, I think, disrupts our growth, the growth and the adoption of Ubuntu, or things like Ubuntu Pro or our support offerings and so on. We see good organic growth, and we've only, I think, just scratched the surface on the enterprise formal adoption of Ubuntu, right? Ubuntu's in a lot of enterprises, but it isn't, in many cases, it isn't yet formally commercially adopted. Mm-hmm. That's changing, partly because we offer a lot of value relative to the competition for the base platform. And we also, now with Ubuntu Pro, we're going well above and beyond the competition in terms of things like security coverage and regulatory coverage and so on.
We're getting down into the economy, into some other topics here, but I'm going to bring it back to the stuff that those folks at KubeCon would be really interested to hear. as a final wrap up, I know you've got other places to go. What do you see happening in the Kubernetes space going forward as we move through 22 and beyond?
We're very much in the maturing phase now. I think Kubernetes is well understood. There are still problems to solve. There are still loose ends, and there's a whole, enormous innovative kind of community on top of Kubernetes. But in terms of K8s itself, I think now, the course is very clear. For most people, it becomes a push button thing. So they have an institutional way of pushing the button to get a Kubernetes, and anybody in the business can push the button and get a Kubernetes, and it's the same Kubernetes, simplistically. My gut feel is that on Amazon, that's the Amazon Kubernetes. On Google, that's the Google Kubernetes. On Microsoft, that's the Microsoft Kubernetes. And we're very proud to partner with those organizations, make sure that you can get that in an Ubuntu flavor effectively, which means you can get all the way down to the host and essentially impose your corporate policies on the host effectively in Kubernetes in a consistent way across clouds and VMware now and bare metal and so on, right? So I think that piece is very, very clear. I think there are sort of real questions about application management, application distribution, application integration, and so on top of Kubernetes. It's a difficult problem. Kubernetes, I think, is famous for kind of making things fast, but it's also getting famous for making things complicated. And so that's a really interesting conundrum and a hot sort of topic for discussion. Certainly a big area of R&D for us. Where I'd like to be is that there's 500 standard applications that you can just grab and run on Kubernetes without having to know anything about those applications. And we're not there now, but I think Canonical's in a very good position to do that, and to do that in a multi-cloud kind of way.
That's fantastic, Mark. Thank you again for your time.
Good to see you. Nice to see everybody here.
Our day's just getting started. So let's dig right into the new and interesting updates on the Kubernetes landscape with Alex Jones. Take it away, Alex.